The twin moons of Draconis Prime cast their silver glow across the imperial capital, illuminating streets paved with crystalline stone. Emperor Dravon soared above the city on wings that spanned 30 meters, his obsidian scales gleaming like polished armor beneath the moonlight. He had ruled the Draconian Empire for 3 centuries, commanding respect from every species across 17 star systems. Tonight he flew alone, seeking solitude from the weight of his crown. As he descended toward the palace district, something unusual caught his ancient eyes. A small figure huddled against the wall of a service alley, wrapped in what appeared to be a thin palace uniform. Dravon's massive form landed with surprising grace, his talons clicking against the stone. He shifted into his humanoid form, still towering at 7 feet, with horns curving back from his temples and scales glinting along his cheekbones. The figure stirred. It was Meera, one of the human servants who worked in the palace kitchens. Her face, even in sleep, showed the exhaustion of someone who had pushed far beyond their limits. Her hands were bandaged, her uniform torn at the hem, and she shivered despite the warm night air. Meera. Draven's voice rumbled, though he kept it gentle. The human woman's eyes fluttered open, widening in terror as she recognized the Emperor. She scrambled to her feet, swaying dangerously. "Your Imperial Majesty!" She dropped into a clumsy bow, nearly collapsing. I apologize for this disgraceful—" "Why are you sleeping in the street?" Dravon interrupted, his golden eyes narrowing. "You have quarters in the servant wing." Meera's gaze dropped to the ground. "The quarters. They're reserved for native species, Your Majesty. Humans are granted lodging only if there's space available. This month there wasn't." Draven felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, anger, but not directed at the trembling woman before him. "And the overseers allowed this. They follow the law, Your Majesty. The Human Integration Act permits—" "I know what the law says," Dravon cut her off, his tone sharp enough that Meera flinched. He had signed that legislation himself 2 decades ago, when humans first joined the Empire as a client species. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. Humans were newcomers, after all, and resources were finite. But standing here, looking at Meera's exhausted face and bandaged hands, the law suddenly seemed less like reason and more like cruelty. "How long have you been sleeping outside?" he asked quietly. 6 weeks, Your Majesty." 6 weeks. Dravon's jaw tightened. "And you continued to work?" "Of course, Your Majesty. The palace kitchens prepare meals for 3,000 souls daily. We cannot afford to miss shifts." Pride flickered in her tired eyes. "Humans may be small, but we do not shirk our duties." There it was, that peculiar human trait that had fascinated Dravon since their species first made contact. Humans possessed no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no telepathic abilities. They lived barely a century if they were lucky. Yet they possessed something else, something that even the mightiest dragons had to admire, an unbreakable will to persevere. "Come," Draven commanded, extending his hand. Meera stared at it as if he'd offered her a live serpent. "Your Majesty, I am bringing you to the palace. But I cannot. The servant's entrance doesn't open until—" "You are not using the servant's entrance." Draven's tone left no room for argument. When Meera hesitated, he simply scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing to him, light as a child despite being a grown woman. "Your Majesty," Meera protested, scandalized. "This is highly inappropriate. I'm just a human, I'm not worthy of—" "Be silent," Draven said, but without real anger. His wings erupted from his back as he shifted partially, and with 2 powerful beats they were airborne. Meera gasped, clutching at his robes as the city fell away beneath them. Dravon felt her trembling, whether from cold, fear, or exhaustion he couldn't tell. Perhaps all 3. They landed on the Emperor's private balcony, a privilege reserved for visiting monarchs and heads of state. The palace guards stationed nearby nearly dropped their weapons in shock. Their Emperor had just landed carrying a human servant in his arms. "Summon the Chamberlain," Dravon ordered. "Immediately." Within minutes, Lord Vexthar, the Chamberlain, arrived, his serpentine features arranged in careful neutrality despite his obvious confusion. "Your Majesty, Lord Vexthar, you will personally ensure that Meera is given quarters in the noble guest wing. She will have a private room with a proper bed, heating, and all amenities." The Chamberlain's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, the guest wing is reserved for—" "I am aware of what it is reserved for. I have just made an exception." But the other servants, the protocols, will be changed. Draven set Meera down gently, though he kept one hand on her shoulder to steady her. Effective immediately, all palace staff, regardless of species, will be provided adequate housing. Lord Vexthar, you have 1 week to make the necessary arrangements. If you require additional funding, you will have it. If you require additional space, we will build it. Your Majesty, Vexthar said carefully, the Council will question this decision. Humans are still a client species, and treating them as equals. This is not about equality. Draven interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. This is about basic dignity. Meera has worked in my palace for 6 weeks without proper shelter, and no one informed me. That ends tonight. He turned to face the Chamberlain fully, his presence suddenly overwhelming. If humans are valuable enough to serve in my palace, they are valuable enough to sleep under its roof. If they are reliable enough to prepare food for my nobles, they are reliable enough to be treated with respect. I have conquered 17 star systems, Lord Vexthar. I did not do so by breaking the spirits of those who serve me. Meera swayed on her feet, and Draven steadied her again. Look at her hands, he commanded, bandaged from kitchen work. Look at her face, exhausted from sleeping in the streets. She could have fled. She could have stolen. She could have simply stopped coming to work. Instead, she persevered. That is not weakness, Lord Vexthar. That is strength. The Chamberlain bowed deeply. I understand, Your Majesty. I will see to the arrangements personally. See that you do. Draven turned back to Meera, whose eyes had filled with tears. You will rest tonight. Tomorrow, you will return to your duties if you choose, but you will do so with a home to return to. I don't understand, Meera whispered. Why would you do this for me? I'm nobody, just a human. Draven smiled, showing teeth that could tear through starship hulls. You are not just anything. You are a person who refused to surrender despite every reason to do so. That is precisely the quality I value most in my empire, in any species. He gestured to the guards. Escort Meera to the guest wing. Ensure she has everything she needs. As the guards led her away, Meera looked back once, disbelief still written across her features. Draven watched until she disappeared into the palace, then turned to gaze out over his city. By morning, word of the Dragon Emperor's midnight decree had spread throughout the palace. By evening, it had reached every corner of the capital. The Emperor had personally carried a human servant through the sky. He had given her noble quarters. He had rewritten palace law for her sake. Some called it madness. Others called it weakness. But those who truly understood Emperor Draven knew better. He had not made this choice out of sentimentality or politics. He had made it because he had seen in Meera's exhausted face the same indomitable spirit that had built his empire. The refusal to break, even when breaking would be easier, and perhaps, he thought as the twin moons continued their eternal dance above Draconis Prime, that was the true measure of civilization. Not how you treated the powerful, but how you treated those who had no power at all. Humanity had proven their worth that night not through conquest or technology, but through the quiet perseverance of one tired maid who refused to give up, and the Dragon Emperor had answered in kind.